Thank you for staying with us. Now, our discussion tonight focuses on a statement that was made by the president during the Jamhuri Day celebrations. I'd like you to listen to it now, and then I will introduce you to my guests and we can have a reaction from that and start our conversation. Remember, our poll is actually ongoing on social media. The question we're asking you is, do you believe the president when he says that foreign nations are colluding, so to speak, with civil society to influence or interfere with the election outcome in 2017? Please do take part in that. The hashtag on social media is CheckPoint. But let's listen to the president's statement that started off this whole discussion.
Uamuzi ni wa wananchi wetu. Hatutaki tuingiliwe na nchi zingine wakituambia wanatusomesha sijui civic education ati njisi ya kupiga. Wakenya wanajua kupiga kura. Mkitaka kutusaidia, help the organizations, IEBC and other institutions. Help them. Sio hii magrupu ingine inazunguka huko na mambo ya ukora. Hiyo hatutaki.
All right, so let's talk about this a little bit more tonight with Ndungu Githinji, who's on my extreme right. He's the Member of Parliament for Tetu and the Chair of the Foreign Relations Committee in the National Assembly. And right next to him, Irungu Houghton, who's Associate Director at the Society for International Development, SID. Thank you, gentlemen. Ndungu, I'd like to start with you. Your reaction to that statement, many saying the president should have gone a step further and substantiated his claims.
Well, Yvonne, I think it was poignant that the president made that statement during Jamhuri Day, which is the marking of the day of our independence and the establishment of Kenyan sovereignty. It is important and to note that democratic elections are a fundamental part of the expression of the sovereignty of the people of Kenya. I am a product of that process, as 349 other members of the National Assembly and 47, 8 odd senators of the Senate of the Senate. So it's important that that process must be untarnished, must be uninterfered with, must be unfettered. Any activity in this country, and indeed in other countries around the world, that is deemed to influence, interfere, or somehow undermine that process must be called out and taken action upon, because that is a fundamental interference in the internal affairs of any country, and it is also a fundamental interference in the democratic expression of our nation, and ultimately leading to the interference of the sovereignty of this nation. So it was important for the president to call it out, because it brought this important issue to the attention of Kenyans. 16 billion shillings certainly is indeed an incredible sum of money. I was in my constituency just this morning at a function at Mwenji, and the people were asking me why this money is not used for development. Why can't they come and build bridges and help us with building dams and irrigation? Because this is certainly what the Kenyans need. And they had no problem in understanding the process of the election. All
right, Ndungu, by the time the president is making a statement like that, assuming that he has access to all the instruments of power, one would imagine there was some information that was backing that, and many have called on him to, call them out. And like we said, he's got the instruments of power. Why then are these wakoras, still walking out amongst us? Why didn't he go a step further and actually say this country and this nation is working with this organization in the country and this is what they're doing?
Well, Yvonne, you know that the Jubilee administration has been a very open administration, and secondly, you know that this is the first administration to operate under the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which devolves power and separates power. First, the devolution of power to 47 counties, and then the separation of power between the three institutions of government. So he does not have all the instruments of power.
But he can give the information to the police, because certainly what he is alleging would be quite serious.
But I think we're missing the point.
It is indeed very serious, because if this kind of money is brought into the country and it is not accounted for, it is not pass through the institutions which are provided under the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which is the government and either the executive or other agencies that are mandated by the executive, then we have a serious problem. In fact, it even borders on it being a national security challenge, as indeed the debate in the United States is going on about the interference of the electoral process by a foreign power. I wouldn't say which country that is, but they keep saying
Russia.
Well, they keep saying Russia.
Oh, they say Russia. So that by interference by Russia is a national security issue. And in fact, they're even going as far as saying it's an act of war. So why is it good for the goose and it's not good for the gander? Why is it important for them to protect their democratic institutions and processes, but then they want to fund nefarious activities related to our democratic processes without the involvement of the Kenyan government? Okay. What's the secrecy?
All right. Irungu?
I mean, I watched the speech, and I watched it again just a few minutes ago, and I'm actually confused. I'm still confused. Who was speaking in that space? Was it the President of the Republic of Kenya, or was it the flag bearer of Jubilee? And I think one of the things we have to recognize as we go into the elections, there is actually a reason why incumbents don't manage elections. It is actually delegated to an independent authority, and in our case, the IEBC, to manage elections. And that's because there is a conflict of interest in a head of state declaring how the campaigning and how the civic education and how voter registration should be done, except as a leader of a political party. That statement was misplaced as a head of state. It was appropriate as somebody who is an interested party in the elections. And I think as we go forward, I think one of the things that I would be looking to the leadership to do is to help the office of the president distinguish between when he's speaking as a flag bearer in a party that is in a contestation for the next elections, and when he's speaking as a head of state. So I think that's the first point. The second point is that the figure 12 billion shillings has been thrown up like it's a huge figure, but in the context in which we've seen in the last, if you just take the scandals, the corruption scandals, 12 billion shillings is not a large amount of money by our imagination now. If you break that 12 billion shillings down, and this is what's not happening, is much of that money is actually going through government structures. It is helping the Ministry of Interior, the UIANO structures, it's going through UNDP, it's helping the IEBC to be able to do elections. There was something in the papers, I think, saying that this money was being used to create a parallel vote monitoring system. It's absolutely not true. There is a smaller amount that is going into civic education, and that's targeting essentially women and youth. Why is that important? Because in the last elections, we saw less than 6% of women elected into the National Assembly, where my friend Dungu sits. We saw less than 20% of youth. We saw only 2 youthful governors be elected. So I think, for me, the statement that this is, somehow dangerous for the country is far-fetched. I'd like to quote the president, 2014. He went before public, before the public, but in the National Assembly, and he spoke about the national values, and he does this every year. So he talks about how far have we reached in terms of our constitutional values. If you remember that speech, he talked about the need. He said constitutional awareness in this country is very low.
So what you're saying is it's more constitutional awareness and civic education rather than manipulating the vote and telling people how to do it? Is that what you're saying?
There's no evidence that this is manipulating the vote. It's what I think civic education does, and it's a legitimate feature of democracy. In any democracy, there is civic education. We've had at least 5 elections since 1992 and the beginning of voter education. Many public servants and state officials have actually managed organizations that have done civic education, like the Attorney General, for example. So it is not something new to this country. It is not something to be frightened of. And my question would be to Jubilee, and not necessarily the president, but I think to the chairman of the party, why do you fear educating young people? Why do you fear educating women to be able to exercise their vote intellectually?
I need to respond to him comprehensively because his statement that, the president should not be discussing, issues of elections, and that should be left to some independent body is actually a fallacy. Even in the so-called, owners of democracy in the United States, President Obama commented severally on the election. President-elect Trump has made several statements about the election, during the election, and even saying that he will not accept the results of the election. So this is part of democracy, freedom of speech. We can say what we want when we want because it is part of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. the president, in his, position as the head of state and the guardian of the nation, speaking on an issue that is a potential to undermine the institutions of governance in this country, is definitely his mandate. Okay. That is directly in his docket. In addition to that, him raising the red flag is also part of his role as a head of state, because we are signatories to the Vienna Convention of 1961. In the Vienna Convention of 1961, and explicit in Article 41, 1 and 2 of that convention, it says that any visiting state party must not interfere with the internal affairs of the host nation. All number one. Number two, and I want to read it for you for avoidance of doubt. It says, all official business with the receiving state entrusted to the mission by the sending state shall be conducted with or through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the receiving state, or such ministry as may be agreed. So here the president is pointing out that we have a problem. 16 billion shillings is coming into the country. Ministry of Foreign Affairs is not aware. Ministry of Interior is not aware. The money is not passing through them as per the Vienna Convention of 61, unless there's a new convention that we're not aware of. This is what was meant to have happened, that the money is meant to pass through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In many instances, Yvonne, we see heads of mission, ambassadors, high commissioners, traversing the country as if they're campaigning, going from constituency to constituency, county to county. These activities are meant to have been passed through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Okay, so
and
what we're
cleared
what you're
and supervised by that ministry.
They were
because
not clear.
This is what happens in other countries, and this is what happens in civilized nations which are signatories to the Vienna Convention.
As the head of state, does it not behove the president then, to do something about these statements? Because what you've referred to is it's a national security threat, that other nations are doing so. Is it going to go beyond the statement? Because some say if we don't see action, then it's tantamount to fear-mongering.
Well, you see, there's a document that's in the public domain from the USAID. Now, USAID is an agency in the Embassy of the United States of America, which is party to a bilateral agreement between the United States government and the Kenyan government. So that arrangement and our bilateral ties, our diplomatic engagement, is based on government-to-government activities. It's based on the Vienna Convention of Non-Interference, and is based on working with the government of Kenya. Now, if the USAID comes and issues an advert like this, a 55-page document calling for people to apply for various fundings directly through USAID to those institutions, some of which either have been vetted by the US government or have not. And I can tell you in one or two cases, some have not.
Okay.
So if that institution or that agency is then doing activities outside of the government-to-government relationship, outside of the bilateral ties of our two governments, and outside of the Vienna Convention, this is a national crisis.
All right, so do all activities of the civil society have to be vetted, especially if they're funded? In any case, most of civil society is funded by donors from outside the country. Does that have to go through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Has that always been the case?
The scenario that Dunga is referring to does not exist anywhere in the Constitution. Yeah. Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of access to funding is very much guaranteed by the decisions we took back in 2010. So if there is another constitution that you're working with, then perhaps you need to put that on the table so that we can dispense with the conversation that actually we're working within a
it's the same one
country.
That you know,
I'll just finish.
But you haven't read it.
The Society of the Rule of Law. I'm very familiar with the Constitution.
Ah, very good.
What is really important, I think, is to actually indicate, and I think this has been really consistent over the last 4 or 5 years. Jubilee has tried to essentially crush civil society in a number of different ways. The first has been 4 or 5 legislative amendments to remove up to 85% of the funding and channel it through a government body. It has failed on 5 occasions in the very National Assembly that Dunga sits. The other attempt has been through the NGO Coordination Bureau to essentially just issue a series of administrative actions, either to deregister organizations. About 1,500 NGOs were deregistered in one instance. They were re-registered within 24 hours when the minister realized that the NGO Coordination Bureau had overshot. And I have to say that the intelligence, as far as I can see from the press, that you're quoting now is coming from the same institution that has misadvised the government government for the last 4 years?
Absolutely not. I think the government is bigger than one institution, Yvonne, and that is quite paternalistic to assume that the information that we have is only coming from one source. I think the government is more credible than that. The government has many institutions and agencies of which to use to accumulate information. I'll give you an example. Or rather, let me just take you to one of the points that he was making about funding going through an agency in government, and it doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Correction, it happens everywhere else in the world. In the United States of America, the very country that is authoring this document to so-called manage and help us in our election, as if we are unable to do so, they have a piece of legislation called FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act. What does that mean? This act was enacted in 1938. That act prohibits foreign countries from funding agencies or institutions inside of the United States of America if that funding exceeds 30% of the budget of that institution. In addition, anybody who receives monies in excess of that 30% have to register themselves with the government and be registered as a foreign agent, hence the name Foreign Agents Registration Act. And you know very well what happens to foreign agents in the United States of America. You just need to go back to the age of McCarthyism to know what happens to anybody who is funded by foreigners in the United States of America. So we know that they are very strict on foreign funding, on money coming from outside into the United States to fund especially political or pseudo or even quasi-political activities. Let me finish. In addition to that, in the United Kingdom, they have the Charitable Institutions Commission of the United Kingdom, which you have to register with. And before you can do any political activities, you have to get permission and clearance from that commission. So you can't go to the UK and start doing civic education, voter registration, electrical tallying system. You'll be jailed.
All right.
Why do they want to come and do the same thing here and think that we'll just be okay with it?
So let's broaden this conversation a little bit, because some say that the president's statement was really symptomatic or emblematic, if you like, of the relationship between civil society and the Jubilee administration. To be fair, it hasn't been rosy. Not that civil society and government ever get along, but you know that there has been some statements that the Jubilee administration is trying to clamp down on the freedom of association, the freedom of non-governmental organizations, which is, you know, their nature. You know, some are pointing out to some of those statements made by very senior members in the Jubilee administration, calling civil society evil society.
Well, I mean, the civil society have called us pigs and all manner of things. And don't forget, at the start of this parliament, the life of this parliament, there was a massive demonstration funded by civil society, which brought pigs' blood and whatnot. Basically, what was that whole episode about? It was about undermining one of the three arms of government in the minds of the Kenyan public.
So civil society calls MPs MPigs, then it's fair game for the administration to call them.
Let me finish.
Which was that you had raised your own salaries as the first order of business.
We hadn't even started the House. This was at the start of the first House.
What was the first order of business?
It was a debate in the House. It wasn't about raising salaries. It was about the role of the SRC. I mean, we need to get our facts.
You were not discussing SRC,
we were talking specifically the role and the gambit and mandate of the SRC.
You finish.
So we're getting our facts straight. So this then entitles foreigners to fund organizations in this country to come and undermine a fundamental, one of the three arms of government in the minds of the Kenyan public and in the minds of the world. To ridicule it and humiliate it.
Undermining the National Assembly members?
Absolutely. Okay. Not the National Assembly members, Yvonne. No. This was a deeper thing if any thinking Kenyan would see. This was about undermining the institution of parliament so that you can say that anything else that comes out of this house is not legitimate. And this is exactly what you're saying now. Because what we have said, and what the government is constantly saying, we have no problem with civil society. Help us to build dams, help us to build bridges, even to do
but the role of civil society is also to speak about democratization of the country.
Absolutely, but not when they're funded by the United States of America or by England or by Denmark or by Sweden.
There's a sense of paranoia.
We do not fund their institutions to do civic education in their countries.
No, but maybe
why are they doing it in ours?
Would you?
I'm sure
Would they
Jubilee
allow
would.
us?
I'm sure
Would you?
But this is
They won't
hypothetical.
allow us.
Okay,
So,
all right.
so
They
let
won't
me-
allow
let me
us.
come back
It's
to
illegal.
All right.
Let me
let's hear
come to
from
another
you,
issue, and this is the thing that I find really interesting. You have a problem with the Americans, the Finns, the Norwegians funding not just civic education but voter education, when the president has said that voter education is actually quite low. And let me just give you an example. 3 days after the president's statement, he very confidently said that Kenyans have everything they need to be able to vote wisely. Jubilee went and tried to elect officers in 5 counties. And the violence that we saw was really a precursor, and including your own county, if I can put it that way, the violence that we saw there was really a precursor of what's going to happen if we do not pour resources into allowing the enabling environment for elections to take place.
Now, that word
That's
pouring
first.
resources is equivalent to pouring fuel on a fire. Because that's exactly what they're intending to do.
No, the Ministry of Devolution and Planning, and I don't know if you know this, actually has a curriculum that was approved and actually launched by the minister about 5 months ago now, which seeks to actually increase levels of understanding of the devolution, constitutionalism, and the intergovernmental relations. That is actually a government policy, but nothing has happened. The curriculum was developed, it's not been rolled out. When I say pour money in, I say invest. I would be very happy if the Ministry of Devolution would go ahead and actually help people to make wise choices. But the second point I wanted to raise is that you don't seem to have a problem when you take 100 of your party leaders to China to learn how to build a party in the image of the Communist Party. Now, where does the foreign
Wait a minute.
threat
Wait a
become
minute.
an issue?
That is a party talking to another party.
But
We're
the
not talking about
incompetent-
China.
incumbent.
We're not talking about China, the Republic of China, pouring 16 billion shillings
How much
into
was-
Kenya
how much- how
to
much- how much
fund
was studied-
activities around our election. Let me
How
tell
much
you
was
this.
the study
Let me tell you this. Let me
costing?
tell you this, Yvonne. Let me tell you this. In the United States, and again, it's good to compare apples with apples because we talk about democracy, we say we're a democracy, they say they're a democracy. In the United States, there's an organization from Europe that goes to, do election monitoring and evaluation, and lo and behold, to their surprise, when they go to the United States, 13 states prohibit in law foreign election observance and monitoring. 13. Four years ago, let me finish. 4 years ago, let me finish.
Why don't you
wait a
quote
minute.
North
4
Korea,
years ago,
Eritrea,
but they're not democracies.
Zimbabwe,
I'm talking about
perhaps?
the so-called owners of the
Is
patent
China
of
a
democracy.
democracy?
I think you're obsessed with the US, actually.
But this is a US document. It's not a Chinese document.
Let's talk about
this is
leadership
USAID. This is
in the
not,
Kenyan
this is
context.
not
All
North
right,
Korean
gentlemen.
AID. This is
Okay.
USAID. They're
All
saying
right.
that they're democracy. But you see, in the United States, in Texas, interestingly, 4 years ago, the OCSE, this organization which does overseas monitoring and evaluation, went to monitor or to set up and plan for the monitoring of the election in Texas. And the state attorney, the attorney general of Texas, told them that if they dare do any activities of that nature, they would be prosecuted and arrested. Now, Yvonne, what they are doing in their country is good for them. But what we want to do in our country is not good for us. I'm sorry, this is Kenya. This is our country, and this is our sovereignty, and this is our constitution, and this is our independence. This is what we're trying to protect. If money is coming in to set up parallel voter tallying centers, let me tell you that is a direct contravention of Article 2 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. He says he's read it. I don't think he has.
Let me give you an
Article
example.
2, for your information, just to read for you, it says
it's okay.
no
I think
person
people
may
can Google
claim or exercise state authority
All right.
except as authorized under this Constitution.
So
let's-
the role of voter registration is IEBCs.
When
the
senior
role
leaders-
of
Let's allow
civic
everyone
education
to
is
weigh in.
IEBCs.
Brother.
The role of voter tallying is IEBCs.
All right, let's
And I don't
allow
think there's
everyone-
any,
Yeah.
actually, if you read that document closely, I don't think there's any contradiction with what you just said, but and that's a different point. When senior members of your party cross the border and go and give money to have Museveni re-elected or support one faction of the South Sudanese, and we could look at this in terms of even just our neighboring countries, what is that?
Well, I mean,
Is that a violation of the Vienna Statute? Are you saying that the Kenyan government has never supported friendly governments that are in our interest?
what I am saying is that under our laws, because we're talking about Kenya.
You can be a bit direct. Are you saying that we have not done that?
We are talking about the president of Kenya saying that foreign nations are investing or bringing into this country large amounts of money, which is a contravention of our constitution, and it's a contravention of the Vienna Convention.
Let's address the issue that he has raised as well.
I only report and work for the people of Kenya. The president is also an electee of the people of Kenya. We are discussing Kenya
and I think the question also is,
not anybody else's.
All right, and has the Kenyan government been involved or not in elections of neighboring countries?
How can I confirm or deny that?
Because it's been in the public domain.
And because you're a senior member of the Jubilee
Give us
Party.
the documents. Give me a document that says that.
Okay.
Give me a document.
So is that a no
We
or
want
yes?
to deal with facts.
Okay.
Give me a document that has facts, that we've poured money into a foreign nation. But what I do say, and this is very clear, and we've said many times, and I've even been on this forum and said clearly, Kenya has supported democracy in South Sudan. Kenya has supported democracy in Somalia.
You sound like the American ambassador.
Kenya has even invested, well, if you think I am, that's up to you. Kenya has invested a lot of money and time in supporting the government, the federal government of Somalia in establishing itself, even to the extent of hosting them here in Nairobi.
And that's not foreign interference.
Former President Kalonzo Musyoka, no, it's national interest. And this is in support of the people of Somalia. I mean, are you saying that we should sit idly by and watch a friendly, neighborly state, 40 years of war and leakages of
I'm just trying to establish that we are not holier than thou.
And it's not holier than now.
Gentlemen,
it was at their behest and their request.
Allow me to steer this conversation.
Who has requested this money?
Also, in another
Unless
direction.
Unless it was you and your friends. I don't know.
Ndungu, please, for just a moment, allow me to ask this question. On the converse, civil society has been accused of trying to discredit the Uhuru Kenyatta administration and trying to undermine it from the start with the ICC process, and that civil society itself may have lost its way from 2003 when, many of the civil society actors went into government, and now it's difficult to distinguish, between civil society and politicians, if you like, and that the civil society has been, really active in trying to bring down the Jubilee administration, particularly Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto, and that perhaps that could be responsible for the frosty relations between the two.
I mean, I think the first year of the Jubilee government, that was definitely one of the tensions, and I worked very hard to try and ensure that, that we were able to distinguish between what was happening at that time. And I think the attempts to, for example, the failure to commence the act is one of the biggest, missed opportunities of this government, I think, because there was an opportunity there to put in place legislation that actually would provide clear guidelines to the country and to the civil society organizations in terms of what is acceptable or not. Let me just give you three things. The concern that, and we share this, I think, with government, is the concern about disclosure and transparency of funding. One of the most important things, I think, in the PBO Act has been essentially that there is now a legal requirement for organizations to provide on the internet or in their offices any information, financial information. So it's not just that we have to give it to the regulator, but we actually have to provide it for citizens. The second one is that any director of an organization can no longer get allowances or per diems or any form of financial incentive, that they must be completely voluntary. And the third one, which I think my brother here, Dungo, would like, is that actually we are forbidden to support any political party in any way during an election period or even between elections. Now, the legislation...
Have there been some members of civil society that have openly shown bias with one political side or another?
They will be. I mean, there are 9,000 organizations. If you talk about public benefits organizations, there are probably 30,000 organizations. There are people who they're Kenyans, they vote. I think the best practice in terms of the sector has been not to bring your personal political affiliation into the office that you organize.
But that happens every day. We saw that in the first 3 years of this administration. It happens every day. Africa, even before we took office, was in court fighting the government, saying that they shouldn't be in office illegally. How do you fight a democratic and sovereign will of the people?
I think you have to...
And let me finish.
I think you have to distinguish two things there.
The question that you asked, that some of the members of civil society have been fighting the government, I'll say this. Those institutions of the civil society have neither the capacity nor capability to undermine the government of the Republic of Kenya on their own. They are funded heavily in order to do so. Because they don't have that capacity.
Is this what informs?
Let me finish.
Yeah.
Because we saw it. We saw AFRICOG. Who was funding that?
One legal suit is enough to bring down a whole state?
Who was funding that suit? Why? What was their interest? If the
public
people
interest litigation is actually enshrined in the Constitution.
Let me ask this question,
very good.
gentlemen.
So public interest litigation funded by a foreign nation.
Right.
I mean, is that
allow me to ask this question. Does this then inform the move of NGOs from the Ministry of Devolution and Planning to the Interior Ministry?
That State Department, and it's the government's prerogative as to where any state department should sit, sits in the Ministry of Interior and Devolution. But I really want to make this point, Yvonne, and it can't be gainsaid, that civil society members being funded by individuals or governments or institutions outside of this country to do activities which are undermining fundamentally the sovereign will of the people of the Republic of Kenya is tantamount to treason.
All right. I'd like us to...
if these institutions,
These are strong words, huh?
Strong
Do you
words,
know the definition of treason?
strong words for undermining a sovereign state is treasonable.
Regime change.
Regime change is treasonable.
Is it?
It is treasonable. By unlawful means, it is treasonable.
I mean, I hope this is just a lack of information.
Why do you think the United States, is making such a big hula baloo and a fuss about Russia interfering in the election, and even going so far as to call it an act of war?
Okay, I think your point in that has been made.
I just want to clarify, because my brother here seems not to be aware of the severity of undermining the sovereign will of the people of the Republic of Kenya.
I mean, any power action of the state cannot be undermined by 2 or 3 organizations with less than 10 individuals who work for them, unless you have a very fragile state.
Well, let me tell you.
My sense would be this.
And this is why I say they have no capacity to do it on their own. They have capacity to do it if foreign powers with huge amounts of money pump in this money.
All right, so listen, I'd like us to have our closing comments now. Ndungu, I'll start with you very quickly. So what's the government going to do about it now? The president says there's foreign nations and they're funding certain civil society organizations. Is he willing to put his money where his mouth is, substantiate the claims, take action, give this information to the relevant authorities? Will we see heads roll, or will this be a statement that was made on Jamhuri Day and we don't see action after it? Because I think if we're talking about threat to national security, as you have said here in the course of this discussion, then some people would hope to see some action. If it is Irungu that is working with Nation X, we would expect that by tomorrow, Irungu is at a police station somewhere answering some tough questions.
Yvonne, I cannot speak for the President of the Republic of Kenya. I speak for my constituency, and I certainly speak for many constituencies under my role as a Member of Parliament, and I can also speak as the Chair of Defense and Foreign Relations. The influx or the movement of large amounts of money into this republic by foreign governments for activities surrounding the fundamental democratic process or activity, which is a general election, that those funds do not flow through the government as provided by the Vienna Convention of 1961 and as provided by our Constitution. Article 2 provides that no agency, no person may take activities or undertake activities that are not provided under this Constitution. So for these agencies, 1, circumventing the Vienna Convention, and 2, taking up the role of IEBC, taking up the role of various state agencies within the ministries in the government, is also flouting our Constitution and contravening our Constitution.
Okay. So
in addition to that, they're creating an environment for instability by, how can you say you want more youth and women to be elected, or even men or old people, whatever it is? That is for the people to decide, not for you to inject capital or money to then influence the outcome of that election. That is influencing the outcome of an election. You can't say we want this outcome. That is undermining democracy. And that is undermining the sovereign will. So it's undermining
democracy to say we want more women and youth in positions of leadership?
So is that where
that is not for you to say. It is not for him to say. It is not for me to say.
Isn't that part of the Constitution with the 2/3 gender rule and making sure there's more youth?
Non-discrimination.
What I'm saying, when you go to the ballot box, not you, nor you, nor me, nor the United States can tell those people who to vote for.
Okay.
Whether they be men, women, youth, children, or anybody else.
I need us to close our conversation, but just a quick yes or no. You seem to have some certain evidence. I know you said you cannot speak for the president. Will you be going to the police tomorrow to say Irungu, person X, nation X have been involved in this activity?
I will certainly be going to the platform that I have, which is the National Assembly.
Okay.
I will be bringing this up on the plenary on the floor of the House. The Parliament is 1/3 of 3 arms of government. So we are government. Let me be clear. We are government. So I'm going to go to my platform in government and make a statement and bring the debate to the floor of the House about this money. Okay. And the Parliament will then, in their wisdom and in their sovereignty, determine and direct the course of the next actions. Okay. Because that is the role of Parliament, whether it's in Kenya or anywhere else in the world. All right. So that is what we're going to do.
Thank you, Ndungu. Irungu, so what next?
I mean, I think, this narrative has worried me. And I think now, having discussed with my friend here, Ndungu, I am actually even more worried for 2 reasons. One is that I think there is an element of panic that's involved in this. I don't know whether it is concerns about what's happening within Central and Rift Valley and so on that is creating this concern. The second one relates to...
I thought you were not meant to speculate on policies. Now he's making political statements, but go ahead.
I am a political analyst, but I am non-partisan, and I'm speaking in the public interest.
Oh, very good.
So my concern is really that...
Who elected you to do that? Anyway, go ahead.
I don't need to be elected. I have a constitutional right, like you said.
Go ahead.
You know those articles...
Let's let him finish.
Those citizens you referred to in terms of the sovereign power of citizens, I'm one of them. And there are 40 million other ones.
So why do you get your funding from outside the country?
Let's let him finish.
I can answer that question.
Why do you get your money from somebody else?
That's what they call a disruptive tactic.
But go ahead.
So my closing comments on this is that I think one of the things that we need to come to an agreement on, I think very quickly, is what is the enabling environment for an election season that does not have the violence that we saw in the elections just recently in Jubilee and we've seen in the past with Quad, that we have I guess an environment in which people are making informed choices. It is, like you say, it is the right of every citizen to decide who they want to represent them. It is important that we do highlight that we do have deficits in terms of the choices we're making. We know, for example, again, he's interrupting.
Who makes that
determination? You see, my concern with this kind of a conversation is that you don't allow people to finish a train of thought.
But you're making a categorical statement that we have deficits. But who determined that?
Everybody determines that. I mean, we know it. For 6%, I mean, we have a population, 50% women. We produce less than 6% in the parliament.
That's a pattern of our patriarchal society. No,
are you happy with that?
Look, it's not about whether we're happy or not. It's what it is.
No,
in the United States, they're saying they want more youth and women. They have 60% election by youth and women in their country. So why don't they fix the one in their country before they come and fix ours?
Let's let Irungu finish, and then we can close our discussion.
Go ahead.
I know you're passionate about this issue. So I think the other thing that the concern is that we need to be clear. What is the potential leadership that we could generate in this country? And I don't think we've got there yet. We know that 70% of your colleagues will not return in the next elections because of precedents and trends in the past. We know that the EACC is currently looking at least 70 to 80% of the governors in terms of them falling short of the
argument for me there.
Integrity.
So
argument. We do need to generate leadership. But we don't generate leadership by creating an atmosphere in which the freedom of expression is criminalized, the freedom of association is criminalized, and we are tear-gassing anything that moves that has any political view in this country that is inconsistent with the ruling party.
Look,
all right, gentlemen,
if freedom of expression means going and breaking people's shops and stealing their goods, and that is what is being funded by foreign countries, then we'll tear-gas it.
Right,
we will not allow Kenyans' lives and property to be put at risk by foreign money. That will not happen, not in Kenya. That happened before independence,
Tetu, Member of Parliament, Chair of the Defence and Foreign Relations Committee, thank you for your time. Irungu Houghton is Associate Director at SID, Society for International Development. Thank you, gentlemen. We wait to see what happens when you present this on the floor of the National Assembly and what will happen after that. Perhaps there'll be protests outside the National Assembly, and then we can see.
As long as they don't break anything, it's okay. They can do it. If they break anything, there'll be problems.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen.